All right, everyone, welcome. Welcome to this alumni gathering. It's the beginning of the weekend. I think with it being a holiday, we're missing some people tonight, but I'm sure that a lot more will turn up tomorrow morning. And plus, I think some people are traveling tonight as well. I think it's wonderful to be here. I'm Alan Cramb. I'm the president of the university, and it's really a wonderful experience to come to India. You know, we have such a long history with India, and really, if we look at Darshwasan being one of the leading people who really developed a relationship with India. And this morning we had a graduation, and we graduated 25 new students in a number of different degrees in our online program. And if you think about it, it's quite surprising that we started doing online before there was the internet. Actually, we started doing what is now online when people used to do correspondence. And we were one of the first correspondence universities back in the 50s. And then in the early 60s, we started thinking about how we could expand our education away from the campus. And at that time, the Finkel company of Finkel Steel actually invested $1 million in our ability to have TV lectures. We built a satellite on campus, and we beamed to then the Sears Tower so that we could then broadcast TV lectures to different parts of the city and to companies. And at that time, we were doing cohorts and companies where people would go and just sit in front of TV screens and watch our lecturers. And that went on for a long time, and actually became very popular with Motorola. And when Motorola moved to India, Bob Galvin, who was the chairman of Motorola at that time, also was the chairman of the board of trustees, brought us to India at that time to do the same thing and have TV lectures in India. And we did that for a number of years, and when we started doing it and Darsh became involved in that, Darsh said to him, we can do this for Motorola, but we have to do it for others. And we actually opened it up to others. And that led us with time to have the office in India, to have offices in different cities in India, and then eventually for it to be the online program we have today. So if you look at it, we are the 20th year of graduation, which means it's probably 22, 23 years since we started having these online programs in India, thankfully, because of Bob Galvin's vision. So it's interesting to just think that great ideas last, which probably means that if it's not a great idea, it doesn't last. But this was a great idea, and it's lasted. And actually, we're looking for it to even expand. We will see more degree programs being offered here, and we're looking to start replicating this program in other countries also. I know that Peter is here. He's our provost, and he's looking to really start some programs in China. But I think the other thing that's very interesting here is the idea of certificates online is alive and well here. We saw a number of students getting certificates this morning, and that's something that we see is very important going forward. This word upskilling, as everyone seems to use it now, so that people who are our graduates or others can take 2 or 3 courses and end up with a certificate. And we see more and more that our alumni really wish to have continuing education after the degree so that they can maintain their ability to be current and develop new skills as things change. You know, we're a university that this year announced we now have an undergraduate degree in artificial intelligence. Second one in the country. Carnegie Mellon was the first. We were the second. We have 3 degrees, different degrees depending on the area you're in cybersecurity. So you'll see our university changing with the times, bringing in new degrees with the times, and we will be offering these across the world. Now we have a number of people here tonight that I want to mention. First of all, I want to thank sponsors, trustees, and a committee. So if I start with some of the sponsors, Parth Amin, who was here earlier, I'm not sure if he's still here. We're all going to be in his house tomorrow. He's invited us all, after we go and see his software firm, to go to his home for dinner. I'm sure that'll be an amazing experience. Sanjay Krilaskar, Madhavan Nair, Brian Ippolitino, who is here. Where is Brian? There he is. There's Brian. Manu Vara and Pinakin Patel were all sponsors of this event tonight and tomorrow. We have one of our trustees here today, and that's Bob Hall. Bob, where are you? You'd stand up and be recognized. Well, not only is Bob a trustee, but he's a long-time supporter of the university and supporter of the alumni group. And in a year or so, he'll become chair of the alumni group. Or 2 years, is it, Bob? 1 or 2 years? Soon. And then the committee, I'm just not going to mention all the people in the committee, but let me just mention the one that's here. And the reason that we're in India is that Raj Rajaram really pushed for us to come here because he said we've had a lot of successful international meetings, and the last one is in Paris. The next one should be here in India. So where is Raj? And then let me just recognize some university leadership. As I mentioned, Peter Kilpatrick, who is our provost, is here. He's the chief academic officer. Mary Dawson, as you all know, Mary's been involved in international affairs for many, many years, working with Darsh, and she really is the glue and the contact between India and our university, and has done many things to make sure that these programs are successful. We also have people from the Universitat Politècnica de Valencia here. Thank you for coming. We have people from Kurukshetra University. They would just, yeah. And now it really is my pleasure to invite Raj to come and make a few welcome remarks to the group. And Raj is a graduate of law in '91, but he's been fully involved with the university for many years. I met him almost the first year I was here 12 years ago, and I've seen him continuously be involved in the university, and I can think of no better person to come and welcome everyone. Raj?
Thank you, President Cramb. Thank you all for coming this evening. This was a distant dream last year for me, that we should do the global gathering somewhere in Asia, because we did it in Europe in 2017. And started looking around, thought of our alumni in Bangkok, whether we should do it there. But when I talked to Parth Amin, whom I've known for a few years, I said, Parth, you have a huge company in Bangalore, and with your logistical support and sponsorship, we can do a wonderful global gathering in Bangalore. And he said, I'm so surprised. I just asked him for a big sponsorship, and he said, yes. No questions asked. I said, these are the kind of alumni that make Illinois Tech great, who just are willing to give their money, time, and all their talent to Illinois Tech. So with that, started planning, and the team in our alumni relations office, there are many, many hardworking people whom we don't see here. Carrie Casper, Jamie Acton, and a whole host of staff made it all possible, developing a wonderful website. And all this, tomorrow you will see a real full gathering at tomorrow morning's meeting. Today being a holiday in Karnataka, some people are celebrating it, didn't show up here. But Shri Kumar, who's our manager of our IIT India operations, he mobilized his staff to call alumni all over India. And my friend Gautam Mahajan. Gautam, would you stand up, please? He is our active alumni in Delhi. And right from the moment I told him I need your help in getting this global gathering going in Bangalore, he has been with me all along. And one thing that it showed us that we can get a lot more alumni involved in these events if we have a wonderful current database. And we are working towards that to keep, because we have 4,000 plus alumni in India. We have 78,000 alumni all over the world who are proud of Illinois Tech's education. So we will become bigger and better in further future global gatherings. And tomorrow evening, at the end of the evening, I will announce to you where we are planning our next gathering and when it would be. So I want everybody to get excited about it and we'll save the date later, but that's the kind of excitement that brings alumni together. And without the help of, again, Alan's blessing to make all this happen, Darsh Vasan, he's been my mentor since 1999, when, although I'm a law graduate and I don't practice law, Darsh, through a common friend, said, Raj, we want you involved. And I want you to give a check for starting an international scholarship fund for international students who run into financial difficulty. I said, I have been an international student before, some years ago, so here is my check. And since 1999, he has held me tight to make sure that I keep doing more and more things for Illinois Tech. It's my privilege and honor to put this gathering together. Lots of wonderful people behind me who did this. And so welcome, enjoy, and we will grow bigger and better. That's my word to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Raj. So now it's really my pleasure to introduce Ankur Jain, a computer science graduate from 2003. Ankur earned his BS in computer science, worked briefly for Motorola, started a healthcare revenue management venture in New York and sold it in 2007. His office in Brooklyn was near a craft brewery. Post-work drinks and tastings led to a full-fledged craft beer conversion. He returned to India after the sale of his startup and founded B9 Beverages. Began importing and selling European and US beer to the Indian market, and in 2015, Bira 91 was launched, the first Indian-based craft beer. It quickly became the largest draft brand in India. Bira 91 is now in the top 25 craft beer brands worldwide. He's a fellow of the Disruptive Innovation Foundation, a non-profit organization that raises awareness of and encourages the advancement of disruptive innovation theory and its application in societally critical domains. He was named Fortune's Top 40 Under 40 from 2016 to 2019. He was named GQ India's 50 Most Influential Young Indian Innovators in 2016. Is named the Economic Times Hottest Business Leader in 2018. So please let me welcome Ankur to say a few words.
Good evening. Thank you, Professor Cramb, for that great introduction. I didn't know it at the time, but as I connect the dots back, a lot of what I've done over the last 5 years in creating Bira 91 bring me back to the 4 invaluable years I spent at IIT Chicago as a student. I took a one-way flight solo on my 18th birthday from Delhi to Chicago. I still remember taking the cab from O'Hare at 6 p.m., already dark, my first time in America, and asking the cab driver to take me to McCormick Hall.
First, to highlight our progression from
McCormick Place Convention Center instead of our campus. Eventually, after convincing the driver we were at the wrong McCormick, I finally got dropped off to my dorm, not before learning about how not to give instructions to a cab driver in Chicago. I got my first job at the dormitory cafeteria and learned to respect all work and also the irreplaceable value of hard work. After all, it got me paid. The first week in class, I learned not to cheat or take the shortcut. Believe me, coming from India, this was a big cultural shock. It's not okay to be too clever. Yes, it's simpler to be straight. I came to IIT not just because of its computer science program, but because of my dad, an architect who had spent a few weeks on campus meditating around Mises' masterpieces. Secretly, I wanted to be like him, an architect. IIT taught me it was okay to pursue your interests, even if they did not fit neatly into a designed curriculum. Besides classes in computer science, I took classes in architecture, which refined my sensibility on design, humans, space, and energy. I took classes in art history with Professor Snapper and got exposed to jazz. Professor Snapper was a big fan and frequently took the class to smoky, but some of the most amazing jazz clubs on the south side of Chicago. I became a campus rep for the Museum of Contemporary Art, primarily to get free access to the museum and to their parties. I even formed a book club and read books with Professor Quiros at the Rain Dog Cafe across from the Art Institute of Chicago. And Chicago was that perfect introduction to America. With its mild Midwestern manners, its 4 full seasons, the winters slightly longer than the others, but the ideal urban diverse laboratory of culture, technology, music, food, sports, art, and architecture. And I had my first beer at IIT. Still 18 and not quite legal drinking age, I signed up for a class with Professor Misa on history of technology and the Industrial Revolution. And the professor on the first day of class walks in with a case of beer, Anchor Steam Porters from San Francisco, pours the beers for all the students and proudly announces, "Take a sip, boys and girls. This is what the porters in the dockyards in England got as refreshment in the middle of the day after they had unloaded all of the spices and teas, textiles and tools from India and America. This is what the Industrial Revolution tasted like." And I made some of my best friends for life on campus, from countries as diverse as America, Pakistan, Nigeria, New Zealand, Russia, Bangladesh, Japan, Korea, Morocco, and France. Hell, I even made my first South Indian friends at IIT Chicago, all of whom have shaped my cultural viewpoint of the world. And that viewpoint is that everybody deep inside their hearts, no matter from where in the world they are, want to make play. We go to school, prepare for college, finish college, prepare for a job interview, and finally land that well-paying job that we've always wanted. We get married, start a family, and want to make a life full of convenience and safety. But somewhere along the way, the burden of responsibilities make us also forget what we've always wanted to do, which is to just play. I firmly believe that you create more when you play more. Play is meant to break the pattern. Play is to look at the world with a different pair of eyes. Play is collaborative. Play is regenerative. Play is freedom. Play makes life's challenges more fun. Play makes us human. It is not for nothing that another word for play is recreation. I created Bira 91 as a beer that brings out your inner child, that fun, friendly, slightly odd creature that is inside all of us. And had it not been for IIT, where I learned to learn, connect, drink, explore, and color outside the lines, maybe Bira 91 would not have come to life. Thank you.
Well, everyone, we're now going to take a break, have some dinner, and we'll get back after dinner. Thank you. Okay, everyone, we're going to have a short program just after dinner here. By the way, that was fantastic. I really enjoyed everything. What delicious food. So I'm going to invite Ankur to join me here on stage. We're going to have a seat, and I'll ask a few questions first, and then we'll open up for questions from the floor. But first of all, I hope everyone got a chance to taste the beer. You know, I think it's great. So I thought I'd bring one with me here. It's just wonderful.
Perfect.
So Ankur, you told us some stories of how you get into beer, and you told us a story of drinking beer in class, which we can't share outside of this room. But tell me, for a computer scientist, what have you brought into beer making from your computer science background?
That's an interesting one. I think being a computer science guy or any kind of engineer just builds that analytical mindset. And I think that's super critical in today's world, whether you're in arts or in something as esoteric as brewing. Being analytical is a skill that's non-negotiable. And I think in today's world, every company is a tech company at the end of the day. You just cannot scale without data, without analysis, without technology. And bringing that into the DNA of the organizations, I think what makes us different from other brewers. And I think that's really what it has allowed us to sort of excel in some way.
Now, we've learned from our provost, who turns out to be a beer expert, and he's excellent at describing all of your beers. But what you've done is come up with a completely different taste profile than the traditional beer. What made you think of that, and how did you test that?
So, few things. I think when I decided to start a craft beer company or a beer company in India, I was very inspired by American entrepreneurs in the same field. And what Americans have done so impeccably is actually taken something from old world Europe and innovated far and beyond anything that Europe could ever do, and made beer styles that they could call their own. So when you go to the West Coast, you try an IPA that's got nothing to do with a British style sort of pale ale or an IPA of the 1850s or the 1890s. And they've just created new beer styles, and that's exactly what we wanted to do, but for the Indian climate, the Indian consumer that was just beginning to like beers or enjoy beers. And so we created beer styles that were more sessionable, more accessible, had the right balance, could be appreciated by a consumer who was just getting into beer, but also could not be dismissed by somebody who, like Patrick, is a beer snob. And I think that balance is really important. And I think the other thing that we sort of brought to the table is typically when you think about beer making, you think about the art of beer making, and you rarely think about the science that goes behind it. And I remember I was on this trip to Belgium, pretty much sort of touring some of my favorite breweries, drinking beers at 9 a.m., calling it work. But some of the most impressive things that I saw in Belgium was not just the passion of the brewmasters, the tradition and so on, but also the way science and technology was used to really, to the use of that tradition. And I went to this yeast research lab in Leuven called the Leuven Institute of Beer Research, where I sort of got introduced to gas sort of spectrometers and all of the science that really goes into figuring out what yeast would give us what type of aromas, and what sort of how can you make yeast work to derive flavor. So there's so much of chemistry that's sort of going behind beer, which a lot of even American craft brewers don't think about, because they think about the art and the innovation, but not the science. And I think that's what we try to do differently in our company, where we really use science a lot.
Yeah, I noticed that Heineken now, during their adverts in America, probably here too, are trying to really suggest that IBM and Big Blue's helping them develop beers, which is, when I watch their commercials, my first thought is, you've turned it into only science, but not the art of understanding taste. So how do you blend both? I mean, it's one thing to say this should do this, but then to understand what people will like. And you've done something I think is amazing. You've developed beers that most people who don't drink beers will like. So how did you get there?
I think the first thing to acknowledge here is that human beings are very emotional, and that's true of how they sort of interact with things visually. So when you look at our brand, it is meant to evoke a very visceral emotional reaction. But also when you taste, there's something emotional that beers or food, beverage, etc. spark in a consumer. And I think once you acknowledge that, you don't become, I don't know if that's the right word, but you don't become a slave to science, or vice versa, you don't become a slave to art. So having that mix and balance is really important. I have a really interesting story to tell here. In fact, owing to my computer science background, one of the problems that we were trying to solve for the Indian consumer was the lack of availability of draft beers in this country. So if you go to bars in India, you will not find beers being poured on tap. And the reason is, I wanted to figure out what the reason was, and so I interviewed a few bartenders, and they said, or bar owners, and they said, the moment we have beers on tap, we lose half of our beers because the bartenders would just give them away to our friends and so on and so forth, and we don't know how much of beer we sold and how much of beer we lost, etc. And so we said, okay, we'll do something tech, which is we installed a flow meter in all of our draft beer lines. We connected it to the cloud, and every millisecond or every second, we got a data packet which told us how much of beer had been dispensed out of that dispense machine. And as successful as the technology was, the project was a colossal failure, because what ended up happening was you basically removed the charm of going into a bar and getting a small beer without paying for it.
Yeah.
And so I think that charm has to be retained, and that's why tech can solve, but you also need to know the human side of it.
Yeah, so I find it very interesting that I wonder how many people nowadays even remember that IPA is an India Pale Ale.
Exactly.
You know, and yet when I noticed the point you're making is that my biggest issue with American beers from craft brewers is far too much alcohol.
Yep.
And as they've popped up the hops, they've popped up the alcohol.
Yep.
And I'm not really interested in drinking 2 beers and then having to be driven home because I'm falling asleep or etc. So you seem to have solved that problem too. So what have you done with the alcohol content?
Yeah, as I said, I think our beers are sessionable, so they're mostly 4 to 5% ABV. I think with the Americans, what actually happened, and I think there's a few Americans in the room, so please don't take offense. Yeah, we went from one version of masculinity, which was how many Bud Light cans can you crush, to the second sort of interpretation of masculinity, which was how extreme a beer can you drink, how many IBUs can you drink. And I think our attempt here is to make something a little bit more sensible, if I may call it that.
Yeah, I mean, the same thing's happening with wines now. We can find wine alcohol content starting to ramp up. And I think it's right. It's the culture of thinking if the alcohol content's greater, and you can drink more of it, that means something other than you have a throbbing sore head the next day.
Yeah.
I remember the days when I came to America. I went to the United States in 1975, and you had to search for a dark beer.
Yes.
There were no microbrews at all, and the only beers you could get were from the major distributors. And in the last 30 years, that has changed amazingly, that now you can go and everywhere there's small microbreweries that you can go and eat and drink. Is that happening in India, where the whole idea of you can go to a brewery and eat and drink, is that happening here too?
In fact, over the last 4 or 5 years, we've had over 200 microbreweries open up. And I think it's really following the American tradition. of having locally brewed beers with seasonal ingredients and having a unique beer drinking experience. So that's absolutely happening.
So the one thing I've seen with this is that the variety and quality is amazing.
Yep.
From outstanding to absolutely undrinkable.
Yes.
And sometimes in the same place.
Yes.
You know, what are you doing to avoid that?
So I think given the fact that we are a production brewery, and again, that's sort of connected to the art versus science discussion. You can be an artist and you can make amazing paintings, and some days you'll just make something that you'll call amazing. But when you use science, you have to ensure consistency. You have to ensure that the beer is true to what you designed it for it to be. You need to ensure that it's shelf stable and so on. And I think that marriage is really important. Yeah.
So let's move away from the beer world into the other world you're in, that is of an entrepreneur.
Yep.
What's the challenges you found as an entrepreneur moving into India and starting your own company?
I think I mentioned that I had a cultural shock when I moved to the US. But when I moved back to India, it was a bigger cultural shock because not only had I sort of spent 9 years, I never lived in India as an adult before I moved back to India. So it was a big sort of change for me. And on top of that, I decided to move back to my parents' home at the age of 27, which is never a good idea. But I survived, and I think the biggest challenge, in my view, of entrepreneurship in India is, especially in a field like beer, is that it's very difficult to find capital. There is capital available for tech companies, but even that is sparse. So I would not say raising capital is easy in any sector, but in a sector like beer, it's doubly difficult. And the second challenge is always building teams, and teams that believe in just a thought or an idea and believe in you as a person. So building high quality teams, because now we're at a scale where we're not at a stage where we need to really scale. So building teams has been one of the biggest challenges.
Well, that's an interesting area, because I think that everyone here that's worked in any situation knows that you're only as good as the people you hire.
Absolutely.
So what do you look for when you're looking to hire someone, apart from a graduate from Illinois Tech?
I think our hiring template, if I can call it that, especially at the leadership level, is we want the right mix of people. So there is no set template, so to speak, outside of a couple of personality traits that I really hold dear. But if you look at my leadership team, it is my youngest reportee is 28, my oldest is 58. And so that diversity of, and people have worked across multiple continents, across multiple sectors. Not all of them come from Alcobev. In fact, very little of my front end, my sales and marketing comes from Alcobev. So bringing in outsiders to sort of connect with people who have context of the industry, etc., creates a culture of vibrant discussion. And only through discussion can you get the best answers. So I think that's really important. And I think that sort of links back to the couple of personality traits that I was talking about, which is you cannot be too rigid on your views. You need to be able to listen to other people's views, be analytical, but also just be open to learning. And I think that's really important. So young minds are what we hire despite the age.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. I like that.
Yeah.
So let me open up now for people to ask questions about anything. It can be about beer, can be about entrepreneurship, but it can be anything else. Yes?
So can you shed some light on naming your beers? You know, Bira Blonde, Bira White. Are those your girlfriend after? Let's skip the question.
No, I think, so just starting with the name itself, Bira 91, I wanted a name that was short, easy, tongue-in-cheek, simple. And when you think about premium products in India or in Asia overall, The typical way of doing premium in India is you anglicize the brand name. You add a BERG next to it to make it sound German. Or you sort of have an English name, and most consumers in Asia would pay premium for it. If you had a name like Peter England, for example, people would pay premium for it. But we sort of went in the opposite direction. We said we don't want to make the product sound exclusive and exotic. We want to make the product sound intimate and endearing. And that's why we picked a name which is short, tongue-in-cheek, easy to remember, but also phonetically sounds very Indian. So Bira is beer in a couple of European languages, but for a Punjabi, it would be very similar to the word for the elder brother. For somebody from East India, it would be very similar to the word for the brave one. So it's got similarities, and it can be easily sort of said in a small town in India. And the 91, of course, comes from the country code for India. So we call the brand Imagined in India, and that's sort of behind the naming of the brand.
Yes, over here. Oh, this way first, then we'll come back here.
Ankur, let me congratulate you for the case study which I am listening.
Thank you.
I was 33 when I was CEO of MD.
I can't hear you very well.
Yeah, believe me, I'm so excited to hear you. My question is, when beer went first time inside your, when you were drinking, I
Yes.
heard you get, 18 years
Yes.
and taxi and
Yes.
blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
When beer goes in,
Yes.
and when cash flow stress is there,
When
cash flow,
cash flow stress is there, yes.
how do you handle it?
So I think it's really about handling the business well. So as a startup, we've had multiple episodes of near-death experiences, right? And one of the personality traits that we look for when we are hiring is people who can really sort of handle that level of stress. And it's not easy. There are people who do fall by the wayside, but it is a stress that people should be willing to handle, especially as a growing company. This is something that is almost an inevitability, because you'll never have cash to fund the kind of growth that we sort of experience or are experiencing. So not just my tenacity, but the team's tenacity really matters here.
I appreciate your answer. Thank you.
It's interesting that I sit here as president of the university, but cash flow is one of my biggest issues. I think that...
Shall I tell you, in last 25 to 27 years, this is what gave me biggest stress. And my wife is sitting beside me. I will have beer or alcohol. That's what I said when you had, beer first time going in, and the cash flow.
But that's the other thing. You must have a very supporting wife to survive it.
She is. Thank you.
Yeah.
But here too.
Absolutely.
Yes, I think that I was once at a meeting, and it's a very high-level meeting. I wasn't on the panel, but I was there, and they asked one of the panelists, he says, so tell me, what's the most common reason that businesses fail? And the panelists looked at him and said, there's only one reason. And they said, what is it? He said, you run out of cash.
Either you're too successful or you're not at all. And in both circumstances, cash is really critical to preserve. Yeah.
Brian, I think you heard the next question.
I'm sorry, I have the
Oh,
microphone.
sorry.
That's all right, that's okay. Stone Brewery is right behind my backyard.
Yes.
And Ballast
exactly.
Point, after
Yes.
21 years, have
Yes.
just gone, bought out for billions of dollars. And then, of course, we've got the 1,000 microbrewer in San Diego that just went flop.
Yes.
If you were in my state, in my San Diego, you would fail. However, I compliment you, because if you bring it back to India, you will succeed, because that's the thing that they need. So And I will tell you, that's a good compliment, because every country that I go to with the massive productions that has everything, for example, I would go to Thailand and they have everything. What could I possibly bring to Thailand that they don't already have? And you're doing exactly that. What could you bring to India that they don't already have? And the success that you will get, if you continued, what I studied in Mexico, Mexico has known for tequila, see? And then now they're in the Valle de Guadalupe, which is the wine country.
Yeah.
So you will succeed in the beer as long as you stick with it. My question is that your goal, is to become one of the Stone Brewery and the Ballast Point of our San Diego?
I think it's an interesting question. I had the good fortune of spending a day with Jim Cook, who the Atlantic, I think, called the Steve Jobs of beer at some point. He founded Boston Beer Company, Sam Adams, and at that point I still had not started Beer 91, and I was trying to sort of see if he would agree to export Sam Adams to India. And he had a very interesting comment, and he said, I spent 30 years exploding from infinitesimal to small, and I'm still 1% of the US beer market, and I have no interest in going outside of the US. And that also sort of is aligned to a lot of US craft, where US craft's idea is that it's local. So for Stone to expand even to the East Coast is incredulous. It's usually something that's not going to succeed, or for a Ballast Point, or for Sierra Nevada, and so on and so forth. But in our view, I think while that success, that's given them success to a certain scale, it also limits their ability to go either to go sort of expand geographically, but also to expand to beer drinkers who may not want to drink craft. And I think that's what we're trying to bridge. So our ambition is to really create the first global brand of craft, almost like the Nike of craft. And that's really important. It's really important for us to transcend beyond our local neighborhood and into beer styles that are much more accessible. And I think, so to that point, I think part of the reason why Ballast Point has not been able to scale is because it is such a California brand. And California does not transcend California. And I think that's what we're trying to do.
Brian, I think you were next.
So let me start by saying congratulations, well-deserved success, and I hope it continues. It dawned on me when you shared your story that you had some success in the United States, and then at 27 you moved home and said, I want to drink beer for a living. So can you share, how did that go? Right? Like, talk a little bit about what support you needed to be successful.
So I spent 5 years in New York City after graduating from Chicago. And New York City is, I still consider it to be my spiritual home. I had 4 farewell parties, so I just did not want to move back to India because I was having so much fun in New York. And but I decided to move back, in all honesty, not because of the opportunity for beer, but because my parents are here and I wanted to come back to the nest in some way. And so that was the logic, and eventually I sort of discovered that something that was truly missing in India was missing for consumers overall, and that's what I tried to solve.
So as this discussion's going on, there's an amazing lawsuit about to happen in the United States between Bud Light and Coors Light.
Yes.
Where they're claiming that Coors has stolen or tried to steal the recipe
Yes.
for Bud Light, which I thought was amazing because Bud Light was always the water of the masses to me, and Coors Light was water. So the idea that there would be actually a recipe for these two things was amazing to me. But it brought up the issue of intellectual property. How do you protect your intellectual property?
It's a tricky one. I think at the end of the day, making beer is not super novel. It's like the Bud Light and the Coors Light lawsuit is actually hilarious, because it's like a chef telling another chef, "Hey, you stole my recipe for pizza or whatever else." And I mean, it's flour dough and tomatoes and cheese, and and I think the origin of that lawsuit is actually the corn syrup controversy.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right.
And,
yeah.
I think for us, there are a couple of things that we do. One is we have proprietary yeast, but that gives you protection to a certain level, because there are adjacent yeasts that you can use, which you can use to make similar beer. Maybe not the exact same, but for a palate that's not super discerning, very hard to make out. So I think the intellectual property in this is really the idea and the brand more than the taste. But of course, there's a lot of innovation that you end up doing. We tasted some beers earlier, but I don't think we can claim intellectual property on sort of using cold brew coffee in a stout, right? I mean, it's as simple as that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Peter?
So, Ankur, one of the things that I think is different about your beer relative to Ballast Point or Stone or a lot of the other craft brews that I've drunk is that you blend natural flavors with the beer, but you do it in a way where neither one overwhelms the other. And so there's sort of this delicate balance that you arrive at. And I'm just curious, how do you, I could see you could do it scientifically or empirically and just make, 50 blends and find the one that works. But is there a strategy or a sensibility that you use to blend? Because a lot of beer companies have tried that and most have failed.
I think there has to be a sensibility, because you can sort of do different things, and we've now sort of started defining much more of a process of doing this. Earlier, the process was Ankur tastes it, and if he likes it, it makes the cut. But I think now it's a little bit more organized. But at the end of the day, I would say tasting is really important, and tasting with the right people is really important. So
I'd love to be the taster for your beers.
For sure. It's a very competitive job in the company.
Yes, as we've learned, if there was a job that you drink beer for a living, there would be many people applying for that. In fact, I grew up with many people who thought that was their job, but they weren't getting paid. Yeah, so Sri?
Yeah, thanks, Ankur. I really like the way you describe Bira for Big Brother in Punjabi, and 9-1 stands for the India code.
Yeah.
But what's it with the monkey there?
There's many stories here.
One of which we would like to hear.
So the most common one is when we were designing the brand, I used to live on Hanuman Road. For those of you who don't know, Hanuman's a monkey god in India. But I think in all seriousness, some of the words that we were associating with the brand were creative, urban, unorthodox, fun, social, clever. And the monkey literally jumped out. And if you look at the monkey closely, if you look at the logo, like in the beers that we make, there's a lot of layers. So for the casual consumer, the monkey sort of evokes a certain emotion. We also love the pun that when you have a couple of beers, you go back to being your primal self. So, but then when you look at the visual representation of that monkey, it's got a crown in the shape of a mohawk, or a mohawk in the shape of a crown. And every sort of beer brand that we saw, whether it was a Corona or a Carlsberg or a Tuborg or Heineken, had a crown on its logo. Mm-hmm. We were like, this is perfect thing to be fodder to be made fun of, have fun with. And one eye is winking, one eye is sort of smaller than the other, so maybe the guy is winking, maybe he's gotten into a bar fight. So there's a lot of layers. And so in everything that we do, there's an element of discovery. If you spend a little bit more time with the brand or the beers, you'll discover some some hidden aspect of it.
Okay, one more question here.
Hi, you mentioned about near-death experiences. Please share one.
Sorry?
You mentioned about near-death experiences. Can you share one?
I mean, I think the question was in the context of cash flow. And as we were growing, so there were, I can share many, but a couple I can identify with. So we raised our first round of funding, or second round of funding, which was done by Sequoia Capital. And we're the only beer company in the world that's been invested in by a Silicon Valley venture capital firm like Sequoia. And we signed a term sheet in 2015, March. We were expecting that we would get the money from the investors by June. And it was the first round of institutional funding, so we didn't realize that diligence can take a very long time. And we didn't end up getting the money until December. And those 6 months were literally near death because we had placed orders for beers and we had to pay our vendors and so on and so forth, and we just could not. So that was a big near-death experience. But those types of things happen pretty much every 6 or 9 months, right? So in a business that's growing very, very quickly, it's hard to keep pace. Another incident that we had was we originally started producing beers in Belgium, contract manufacturing in Belgium. And then, because we couldn't find a good brewery in India, and then we established our first brewery in India, which took almost 6 months longer to establish than we anticipated, which meant that we missed summer and we went out of stock in year 2 in most of our markets, and that almost killed the brand. So those are 2 which I can sort of share.
Okay, one last question.
My name is N.M. Shah. As far as cash flow is concerned, there is a fundamental principle of economics. Expenses have got tendency to rise against income. Expenses have got tendency to rise against income.
Yeah.
What happens with the industrialist? I am consultant to financial institution, and I make techno-economy, viability study and all kind of things. When the things are going good,
yeah,
not the entrepreneur, but his assistant comes with some beautiful ideas, attractive ideas, and they ask you to go on spending money. Then you overdo it. But I tell the people, the industrialists, every year when you get the balance sheet, locate the expenses which are going more than what was happening last year.
Yeah.
What is going less, don't look at it.
Yeah.
What is going more, try to reduce it. Sometimes I tell the industrialists, reduce the expenses by 10% straight, irrespective, whatever it is. Now that is where the cash flow can be curtailed. Thank you.
I think that's very good advice, and we're still learning that. I think one of the challenges with a company that has grown as quickly as we have is it is not just related to cutting down expenses, but sometimes chasing growth. And to chase growth, internal accruals may not be enough. So the challenges at our stage are different, but I think that's very, very good advice as well.
I think even if I look at it running a university, that's very good advice because we spend a lot of time in controlling expenses. Everyone wants to spend.
Yeah.
But no one wants to take responsibility for the result of the expense.
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes. Okay, one more question.
This is not the question. This is the experience. Case study like Ankur is very exciting, and to be successful, you need to keep everyone excited from top to bottom. And when it comes to cost cutting and bottom line and top line, you are in the mode of keeping everyone exciting, and as head of the operation, the cash flow is tight. You know it, but you're not telling others. That kind of situation is, I tell you, is so typical. You don't want to tell, you know it, you're expecting, and believe me, these are the kind of challenging and learning like Ankur has learned. I salute you, sir. You are doing great. Congratulations, and you best in luck.
Well, with that, I thank Ankur for this fireside chat. It's been wonderful.
Thank you.
And
Really
thank
appreciate the opportunity.
everyone for coming tonight. And I know we have a wonderful day tomorrow and a nice dinner tomorrow at Parth's house. And I hope to see you all there. Thank you very much.
I just wanted to add one little thing which I forgot to do in the first session, which is to congratulate the graduating class and welcome them to the alumni, to the IIT alumni. Welcome.
Thank you very much. That's great.